Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for being here. So I am going to do a video today on the reptilians and the Great Awakening. This is a video that I have been sitting with for quite some time, and I have been waiting until I got the absolute nudge from my guides that it's time to share it now. And so that now moment is now. And so before I begin, there are a couple things I want to say. One, this message is coming through me. This information comes through me from the Galactic Federation of Light. And this is a very large collective of higher dimensional light beings that are basically Earth's guides. They are watching over Earth's journey or process of ascending into higher states of consciousness. And they are also watching over humanity. And they work with humans to provide information and guidance and a remembrance of what we are doing here and what this is all about. And so the information that I'm sharing today is not something that I researched. It's not something that I created and made up. I have no idea how I know this other than it came in and it is an absolute truth from the Galactic Federation of Light. Now, it doesn't need to be your truth. You do not need to hold this as your truth. So when you begin this video, and if all of a sudden you say, nope, I don't believe this, this is nonsense, please just turn the video off. I am not here to argue or debate any of these points. This is purely a message that will either resonate or not resonate. And if it doesn't resonate, beautiful. If it resonates, fabulous. I asked my guides, what is the intention of me doing this video? Why am I doing this video now? And they said it is to remind the human, because you all know what's happening, to remind the human what they are actually clearing and alchemizing right now. To allow the human to understand the bigger picture, the behind the scenes of everything they are courageously navigating. Because you see, we live in a third dimensional field, which is physical. So what we are seeing is a physical shift in consciousness. So it looks like humans doing things, experiences happening, right? We are watching it physically with our eyes. But there is an energetic experience beyond the physical that's actually what we are alchemizing. It's the consciousness beyond what we physically see that we're alchemizing. And that is why they want me to do this video, to remind you of what that energy is, what that consciousness is. It's like the Wizard of Oz. There's that loud voice, that man's voice, right? That's telling them what to do and controlling them and putting massive amounts of fear in them, right? And they're afraid of this voice and they can't see the voice. It's the same with the human collective. There is this voice that, unbeknownst to us, has been controlling and manipulating our light, our human journey, for a very long time, for thousands of years. There's no good or bad about this. It just is. It's part of the human experience that we've been having for thousands of years. And when you pull back the curtain, you see that it's just one man standing there, and he's old and fragile, right? And when you do that, you dismantle the fear. You dismantle the control and power and manipulation. And this video is pulling back the curtain so that when you go about your everyday, courageously navigating it, however you're doing it, you will remember that beyond the curtain, beyond what you're seeing out there, it's a consciousness that we're alchemizing or clearing. So let's begin, okay? I want you to have an open mind Okay, some parts of this video will sound like a science fiction movie. But settle back, go beyond judgment or attachment to sort of ideas and expectations, and just allow yourself to listen. See if you can just listen energetically to what's coming through. Okay? Okay. So first, what is the Great Awakening? The Great Awakening is this physical shift that we're currently in right now. It is going from, it's the collective human experience. So every human on the earth plane is the collective consciousness that is physically shifting into higher states of consciousness or higher frequencies. So the Great Awakening is when more humans begin to hold higher frequencies in their body and wake up. It's going from, it's the collective consciousness, the human collective consciousness, going from a lower state of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness, or from dark to light. I don't like that term, but lots of people use that, right? From lower density to higher density, from a third dimensional matrix to a fifth dimensional matrix, from 3D to 5D, right? That's the first massive physical shift. So that is the Great Awakening. It's the humans turning on, coming online, waking up, beginning to hold higher frequencies in order to shift the entire human collective. So how are we actually alchemizing or making this physical shift in consciousness, right? How do we do it? The way we do it is that we allow or we watch systems and people that are controlling those systems that have been in place for a very long time, hundreds and thousands of years. We have to allow and watch those systems come up to the surface so that we can actually physically see them, so that we hear about them, we listen to them, we watch them, we become aware of them, we feel them. We feel these systems. And as these systems come up into our awareness, we then have the ability to shine light, seeing it, speaking about it, feeling it. You shine light on it. And when you shine light on the denser consciousnesses, these systems, they begin to dissolve or alchemize, they shift, and they move into a different state of consciousness. So they actually dissolve and they move into a higher frequency. These systems are controlled by a small group of humans, and these systems are held, they hold fear, massive amounts of fear, control, manipulation, greed, mind control. These are large systems of consciousness that are inside these systems. So what are these systems? They're government, they're environmental, they're educational, they're the banking systems, they're the entertainment systems. They're all of these paradigms or ways in which we have been programmed to live within for thousands of years. And they are controlled by a small amount of humans that have been the puppeteers controlling millions of other humans that control these systems. They control the government, they control the media, they control the school systems, they control the banking systems. Believe it or not, there is a small group of humans as puppeteers controlling other humans that are controlling those systems. And we've been unaware of it. And we are starting to wake up and see these systems for what they are in order to alchemize them into light. So that's the Great Awakening. Now, who's controlling these systems? What small minority of humans are controlling them? Humans that are holding a consciousness or an energy that we call reptilian. The reptilian consciousness is inside of the small minority of humans that are controlling the large majority of humans on the earth plane. And so let me explain the reptilian consciousness, okay? Okay. I want you to see the reptilian consciousness not as a physical reptilian like you've seen on Google. You know, those really scary looking faces and those scary physical bodies. If you see reptilians as that, you're going to have a hard time understanding what I'm about to share with you. These reptilians, when they move down into our third dimensional field, I want you to imagine that we're in a cloud of third dimensional consciousness. And when you enter into it, you are now existing inside of a third dimensional consciousness or a third dimensional field, a very physical field. Reptilians are consciousness and energy first, just like you. You are not a human. You're not this physical body. You're not. You're a higher consciousness, spirit, source, soul, galactic being, angel, whatever you want to call it, but you came from somewhere else. You did not come from the third dimension. You did not come from the earth. You did not come from this body. You came into the body as a consciousness. The reptilians are exactly the same thing. Here's the difference between the reptilians and your consciousness and our third dimensional physical bodies. The reptilians exist as fourth dimensional consciousness outside of the third dimensional earth plane and field. Okay? So that not the fourth dimensional field that you're experiencing on the earth plane. They were created and designed in a fourth dimensional field that never experienced the third dimension. They don't have this restricted, contained, vision, like tunnel vision that we have in the third dimension. They are in a higher frequency than your third dimensional body. They're in a higher frequency than the third dimensional field. So you actually can't see them, okay? Some people can see them if they move themselves into higher frequencies, just like you can't see angels right now, right? Or higher dimensional light beings like Palladians and those types of higher dimensional beings. We will eventually begin to see these beings, but right now, most of us can't because we are still very deeply in a third dimensional cloud. Reptilians are holding themselves as fourth dimensional consciousnesses and fourth dimensional beings. They are fourth dimensional. They're not experiencing themselves as fourth dimensional. You are a higher consciousness experiencing yourself in third dimension. Reptilians were designed and created as fourth dimensional beings. They exist in a fourth dimensional field outside of the earth plane. And because of that, they are highly intelligent. They understand the quantum field. They understand how the quantum field works. The quantum field is where you understand that everything exists in the now and that you have access to any other dimensional field if you manipulate energy and consciousness and to bring yourself into that dimensional field. They understand how to warp time, condense time, speed up time. They understand how to move in and out of a third dimensional field. They understand how to move through physical objects. They understand how to annihilate something in an instant. They have an awareness and an understanding of energy that we as third dimensional ego mind personalities don't have yet. Okay, so that's very important to understand as we move forward in this story. They're very intelligent. They're vibrating in a fourth dimensional frequency. And they have access to the quantum field. Okay, so we want to understand that. It's a consciousness first, before you see it as a body. So how did these fourth dimensional beings that we call reptilians, how did they get into and on the earth plane? And in order for me to understand this, I have to go back to the very beginning. And I'm going to put the link to this video that I'm about to describe to you down below. I did a video a year and a half ago about the 12th dimensional grid, and it's an extremely important video. I'll link it down below. When the earth was originally designed in a fifth dimensional field, millions of years ago, she was designed with a 12th dimensional grid around her for the sole purpose of keeping her entire experience contained. Her experience is she is a higher consciousness that chose to experience herself in a physical form, literally for the sole purpose of experiencing a shift in dimensional fields within the same form. So she wanted to experience herself in a 5D physical form, and she wanted to shift herself into a 7th dimensional physical form, and she wanted to experience it. What would this be like? Hard for us to understand, but that's exactly what happened. That's why the earth is here. And so in that process, there was a 12th dimensional grid created by the Galactic Federation of Light that literally kept her entire experience contained. All consciousnesses that wanted to participate and be a part of this came into this 12th dimensional grid and remained in the 12th dimensional grid this entire time. Now, the physical body was holding a 5th dimensional frequency. One of the laws that was set up at that time was that if you were a consciousness that wanted to incarnate into a 5D physical form to experience this shift with the earth, you had to hold at least a 6th dimensional frequency or higher in order to come into the grid and participate. Why? Because the physical body would be shifting into a 6th dimensional field. The consciousness that you are, the consciousness that they are, that any being is, it never shifts. The consciousness doesn't ascend, it's the physical body. So if a consciousness wants to come into a 5D body for the sole purpose of moving into a 6D field, 6th dimensional frequency, that consciousness has to already be at a 6th dimensional field. Therefore, only 6th dimensional consciousnesses or higher were able to enter into the 12th dimensional grid and be a part of this entire experience that we're currently at right now. With that being said, how did 5th dimensional beings and 4th dimensional beings get here? As the earth and human bodies in 5D began playing in the 5th dimensional field, after 1 million years, 2 million years, humans, 5D humans, began to play with energy, with the quantum field, and they started playing in 4D consciousness. And what they started to do is they started to create 4th dimensional beings. And I did a video on this, and I'll link it down below, but they started to create 4th dimensional races and 4th dimensional beings. It's very easy to create another race or another being when you understand energy. And the reason that they started to create a 4th dimensional race or a 4th dimensional being, a 4th dimensional consciousness, is that that consciousness could exist on the earth plane over and over and over again as that consciousness. You didn't have to incarnate into that consciousness. You could experience the 4th dimension as the 4th dimension. So it was no longer you, a higher consciousness, ascending in a body, right? It was now 4th dimensional beings that were existing as 4th dimensional consciousness on an earth plane that was now in a 4th dimensional or 5th dimensional field. Again, I'm not going to go into detail of how this fall happened, but I'm going to link the video down below. How did it start to move down into the fourth dimensional field? How did these beings be created and designed? It's all in the video. I'll link it down below. It's very complicated, and I don't want to waste too much time. But all I can say is that humans, well, higher dimensional beings in human form, in 5D form, started playing in fourth dimensional fields. And they started to design, higher dimensional beings started to design fourth dimensional races. They designed fifth dimensional races, okay? And fifth dimensional races and fourth dimensional races started to exist inside a 12th dimensional grid. And these fourth dimensional races loved playing with lower frequencies and lower consciousnesses. These fourth dimensional races and beings, they're the Greys, the Anunnakis. There's a lot of names for them, the reptilians. I want to state and preface that there are higher dimensional consciousnesses that exist as reptilians, as Anunnaki, as the Greys, as the Zetas, right? They exist in higher states of consciousness. They also created races that are in a fourth dimensional consciousness. And it is those fourth dimensional races and beings that we label, that we have the same name for, which is confusing for the human, because you're like, well, how could there be Greys that are of a higher frequency and Greys that are in a fourth dimensional frequency, right? It's just how the human labels things. We have to have names, and this is how we've labeled it, okay? So there are Greys, there's Anunnakis, there's reptilians, there's a lot of beings that are both in a higher frequency, beautiful light beings, and in a fourth dimensional frequency in consciousness. And it's the fourth dimensional consciousness beings that like to play in the lower consciousnesses. They like to dabble. And they are the ones that brought the Earth down into a 3D field after millions of years. Again, the video's down below. So, after millions of years, we have reptilian races, okay? When the Earth moved into a 3D field, there was a fall and a massive physical collapse and chaotic destruction of the Earth plane, and it was cleared. And all beings, all races, all bodies, everything was taken off the Earth plane, and the Earth began again around 20 to 25,000 years ago in a third dimensional field. Again, watch the video, it goes into detail. So everything was off the Earth plane, and the Earth began again, all over again, with third dimensional forms on her, including third dimensional bodies. And so all of a sudden, higher dimensional consciousness started to go into the bodies and started experiencing the third dimensional field and moving through this consciousness and moving through this ascension process. Where did the fourth dimensional races go? Where did the fourth dimensional reptilians go? They moved out of the Earth plane and they moved into a fourth dimensional field within the 12th dimensional grid. So for thousands of years, while the Earth was in a 3D field, these reptilian consciousnesses existed and currently exist, just like the Palladians exist in an 8th dimensional field somewhere in this 12th dimensional grid, right? And so on, all these other beings. The reptilians existed and exist still. They're held, they're not gone, in a 4th dimensional field or cloud outside of the Earth plane, off the Earth plane, in the 12th dimensional grid. And when the Earth was designed in this third dimensional field, the Galactic Federation of Light put a 5th dimensional grid around the Earth. And the reason they put a 5th dimensional grid around the Earth is so that the 4th dimensional races could not come back into the Earth plane. Because all beings have free will. And so if you put an energetic grid around, if you are existing in a lower state of consciousness, a lower frequency than the grid, energetic grid itself, you can't get through the grid. It's physics. The reptilians couldn't move themselves into a higher frequency in order to move down into the Earth plane. So they existed and remained in this 4th dimensional grid off the Earth plane for thousands of years, watching this whole experience. And it wasn't until around 7,000 years ago when the Earth began to creep up into a light quotient, where she was holding 50% of the light that she needed to reach a 5D consciousness. So one of the universal laws that has been put in place for Earth is that when she reaches and when she is holding 50% of the light needed to stand in or reach a 5D field, dimensional field, there would be a trajectory or timeline that she would enter into where lower dimensional consciousnesses and frequencies would never be able to pull her back down. So there wouldn't be a tug of war. So all she needed to do was get to that 50% mark or quotient within her body, physical body, within the Earth's planet. And she would be on a trajectory or timeline where without no matter what occurred, she was going to be able to get to 5D consciousness. 7,000 years ago, she was around 48%. She was very close. And so Earth, as a consciousness, said, I want assistance. I want to get there quicker. Open up the grid and let in higher dimensional beings to enter in and physically assist the humans so the humans can start to hold higher frequencies so that we can get this party started, so we can get into that timeline. When the Galactic Federation of Light opened the grid, not only did higher dimensional beings come in, but so did the fourth dimensional races and beings. And although in that now moment they closed the grid up, the races and beings were already inside. And so what unraveled for those 7,000 years is not only did the humans create beautiful structures and cultures and civilizations that began holding higher frequencies, right? In South America, in England, in Egypt, all over the world, right? But if you look at where all of these really powerful, potent portals are on the earth plane, Machu Picchu, the pyramids, stone formations that you're like, how did these get here? Those were all designed and created by higher dimensional light beings with the assistance of the human body to create portals or high frequency zones where the humans could begin to activate themselves in order to shift the planet and the human collective into higher states of consciousness. And these places are still around today. And the humans have all these stories about how they were created because they can't understand it. They were created by higher dimensional light beings. Now, at the exact same time that this was happening, the fourth dimensional races and the fourth dimensional beings like the reptilians also were in. And they began to infiltrate the human body. And for thousands of years, they were able to start to pull the frequency of the earth plane and the human down into lower frequencies. The way that the reptilians, because you see the Anunnaki and the Greys and the Zetas and other beings, they worked with the humans differently. They created hybridization programs. They created the abduction programs. They did a lot of experiments on the body. So they would take the physical body and do experiments on them. The reptilians did it differently. The reptilians literally infiltrated the human body and entered into the human body. Now remember their energy and consciousness. So when they come into a third dimensional field, just like the higher dimensional light beings, like the Palladians, the Arcturians, the Sirians, right? When they come in, they're light. You don't see a reptilian floating around and standing in front of you and jumping into your physical body. It's not how it happens. That's why there's confusion around the reptilians. People are like, what do you mean there's a reptilian in that body? That's a physical reptilian. How does it get in there? It's consciousness and energy. As soon as they move into a third dimensional field, they remain in a fourth dimensional frequency and consciousness. You can't see them. And so they came in and they literally entered into energetically the human body and took over the human body. And when they did that, they were able to control and manipulate the human. And the human, or the higher consciousness that was experiencing themselves as the human, was literally suffocated. It was like a being came in, suffocated the light of that consciousness, and took over the human personality. They took over the human's look, right? So the human didn't look the same. The human acted differently. The human spoke differently. Everything was different. The personality was different. And the reptilians fed off of the consciousness of fear. So the more they could create fear, the more they were able to enjoy that consciousness. They loved it. They enjoyed it. Same with control. The more they were able to control, which is a consciousness, the human collective, the more they were able to absorb that consciousness. It's like a drug, right? They need it. It's why they're here. To experience and absorb those lower consciousnesses. It's like a candy, it's like a kid in a candy store. And so the way they absorb it, the way they experience it, the way they feel it, is by being inside the body to digest it. That's how they get the juice of it. It's more fun. It's more tangible. And so for thousands of years, they remained as fourth dimensional consciousnesses inside this third dimensional grid. They didn't multiply. Okay, so once the grid shut, which was right away, they couldn't multiply. So there were hundreds of thousands of them. But they just continued to move into bodies, and then when that body died, they would wait and they'd move into another body, and they would wait, move it, so they were constantly moving into bodies.